The stars had always called to humanity. For thousands of years, people looked up at the night sky and wondered what lay beyond. By the year 2347, they finally knew the answer. Humanity had spread across 17 star systems, building colonies on distant worlds and carving out a small corner of the galaxy to call their own. But humanity was not alone in the universe. Far from it. The Galactic Concord consisted of over 200 spacefaring species, some of them ancient beyond human comprehension. These elder races had built empires spanning thousands of star systems, while humans were still learning to make fire. To them, humanity was nothing more than a curiosity, a young species taking its first stumbling steps into a universe it did not understand. Commander Jake Lawson stood on the observation deck of the colony ship Endurance, watching the sunset paint the sky of Kepler 442b in shades of orange and purple. The colonists had named this world New Haven, and over the past decade, they had transformed it from a barren rock into something that almost felt like home. Jake was a tall man in his early 40s with gray beginning to show at his temples. He had served in the Terran Defense Force for 20 years before accepting this assignment. Most people saw colony duty as a step down, a quiet posting far from the action. Jake saw it differently. He was helping to build something that would outlast him, a new home for humanity among the stars. His communicator buzzed. Lieutenant Emma Vance's voice came through, tight with tension. "Commander, you need to see this. We have contacts on long-range sensors, lots of them." Jake felt his stomach drop. He had been a soldier long enough to recognize that tone. He moved quickly through the corridors of the Endurance, his boots echoing against the metal floor. When he reached the bridge, Emma was standing at her station, her face pale in the glow of her screens. "Show me," Jake said. Emma's fingers moved across her console, and the main view screen flickered to life. Jake counted the signatures. 10, 20, 50. The number kept climbing. 112 vessels, Emma said quietly. Configuration matches Vectari Dominion warships. The Vectari. Jake had read the intelligence reports. A reptilian species that had conquered over 2,000 star systems through sheer military might. They viewed other species the way humans might view insects, as things to be crushed or ignored depending on their usefulness. "They are hailing us," Emma said. "Put it through." The view screen changed to show a face that would haunt Jake's dreams for years to come. The Vectari who appeared was covered in dark green scales, with eyes like pools of liquid gold. When he spoke, his voice was cold and utterly without emotion. "I am High Prelate Zorvax of the Vectari Dominion. You are trespassing on territory that belongs to our empire. You have 48 of your Earth hours to evacuate this world and 2 neighboring systems. Any humans remaining after this period will be dealt with accordingly." The transmission ended before Jake could respond. The bridge was silent. Jake looked at the faces of his crew. He saw fear there, which was understandable, but he also saw something else, something that burned beneath the surface. He saw anger. "Emma, get me a secure channel to Earth Command. Priority Alpha." The connection took nearly an hour to establish due to the vast distances involved. When Admiral Tony Reyes finally appeared on screen, his expression was grim. He was an older man with a face like weathered stone and eyes that had seen too many battles. "We received the same transmission," the Admiral said. "The Vectari sent copies to every human colony world. They want us gone, Lawson. All of us." "What are our orders, sir?" Admiral Reyes was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with the weight of the decision he had made. "The United Terran Council is meeting as we speak, but I can tell you what the answer will be. We are not leaving. Not New Haven. Not any world that humans have bled and worked to build." Jake felt something loosen in his chest. He had served under Tony Reyes for years and knew him to be a cautious man, not given to reckless decisions. If the Admiral was willing to stand against the Vectari, it meant that Earth had calculated the odds and decided that some things were worth fighting for, even against impossible odds. The Vectari have made a mistake, Reyes continued. They looked at our fleet numbers. They counted our worlds and our ships and our weapons. They concluded that we pose no threat to them. And by their calculations, they are correct. Then how do we win, sir? Admiral Reyes almost smiled. They studied everything about us except the one thing that matters. They did not study our history. They do not understand what humans are capable of when our backs are against the wall. After the transmission ended, Jake walked through the colony. He passed homes where families were eating dinner together, unaware that their lives had just changed forever. He passed the school where children were learning mathematics and science and history. He passed the fields where crops were growing under artificial sunlight. All of this, the Vectari wanted to take away. All of this, they expected humanity to simply abandon. He found Ben Cooper in his fields, a farmer with dirt under his fingernails and calluses on his hands. Ben was one of the first colonists, a man who had left everything behind on Earth to build a new life among the stars. "You heard?" Jake asked. Ben nodded slowly. Hard not to. "News travels fast in a small colony. The evacuation ships will be ready within 20 hours. You and your family should be on them." Ben looked out over his fields, at the crops he had planted and nurtured for years. Then he looked back at Jake with eyes that held no fear, only quiet determination. "My grandfather crossed an ocean in a wooden ship because men with power told him he did not belong in his homeland. My father crossed the void between stars because he believed his children deserved better than what Earth could offer. I did not come all this way to run from another bully who thinks he can take what is mine." Jake understood. He had seen that same look in the eyes of soldiers who knew they were outnumbered, in the faces of people who had decided that there were things worth dying for. "Then I guess we make our stand here," Jake said. Ben Cooper smiled, and in that smile was something ancient and dangerous, something that had carried humanity through ice ages and plagues and world wars. "Let them come," he said. "Let them find out what happens when you corner a human being." Across New Haven, in homes and workplaces and gathering halls, similar conversations were taking place. The Vectari had given humanity 48 hours to run. Instead, humanity began to prepare for war. On Earth, the Great Chamber of the United Terran Council was filled with voices. Representatives from every human world had gathered, some in person, and others through holographic projection. The noise was tremendous, 100 different arguments happening at once. Councilwoman Lisa Grant stood at the central podium and waited. She was a small woman with silver hair and sharp eyes that had seen humanity through 3 major crises during her 30 years in politics. When she raised her hand, the chamber slowly fell silent. "We all know why we are here," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "The Vectari Dominion has demanded that we abandon 3 of our colony worlds. They have given us 48 hours to comply. The question before this council is simple. Do we run or do we stand?" A representative from the Mars delegation stood up. "With respect, Councilwoman, we must consider the reality of our situation. The Vectari control over 2,000 star systems. Their fleet outnumbers ours by a factor of 50 to 1. Fighting them is not courage. It is suicide." Lisa nodded slowly. "Your concerns are noted. But let me tell you a story. 200 years ago, the Vectari encountered a species called the Peloran. The Peloran were peaceful people, artists and philosophers who had no military to speak of. When the Vectari demanded their surrender, they complied. They believed that cooperation would spare them suffering." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the chamber. "The Peloran no longer exist as a free people. They are slaves, their culture erased, their children raised to serve Vectari masters. That is what awaits any species that shows weakness to the Dominion. The Vectari do not respect surrender. They see it as proof that you deserve to be conquered. The chamber was silent now. Lisa continued, her voice growing stronger. Humanity did not claw its way out of caves and across oceans and into the stars by surrendering when the odds were against us. We survived ice ages. We survived plagues that killed half our population. We survived wars that burned entire cities to ash. We are still here because when the universe tried to break us, we refused to break. The vote was unanimous. Humanity would not abandon its colonies. Humanity would fight. But Lisa Grant understood that war with the Vectari would not be won through speeches alone. She knew that humanity needed to send a message, one that even the arrogant High Prelate could not ignore. That was why Ambassador Grace Holloway boarded a small shuttle and flew alone toward the Vectari flagship. Grace was 63 years old, a career diplomat who had negotiated peace treaties and trade agreements across a dozen star systems. She had white hair and a face lined with age, and she stood barely 5 feet tall. To the Vectari, she must have looked utterly insignificant. That was exactly what she was counting on. The interior of the Vectari flagship was dark and cold, designed for a species that had evolved on a world with dim sunlight. Grace walked through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, past guards who towered over her, their golden eyes watching her every move. Finally, she entered the throne room of High Prelate Zorvax. He sat on a chair carved from some kind of black stone, surrounded by his advisors and generals. The room fell silent as Grace approached. She knew she was supposed to bow, to show proper submission to a superior power. She did not bow. "High Prelate Zorvax," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I bring the response of the United Terran Council to your ultimatum." Zorvax leaned forward, his golden eyes narrowing. "Then speak, little creature. Tell me that your leaders have chosen wisdom over foolish pride." Grace smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that a grandmother might give to a child who had made an obvious mistake. "The people of Earth reject your demands. We will not abandon our colonies. We will not surrender our citizens to your mercy. If you want our worlds, you will have to take them." The room erupted in hissing laughter. Zorvax silenced his followers with a gesture. "You amuse me, human. Your species controls 17 systems. We control thousands. Your largest warship is the size of our smallest patrol craft. You cannot possibly believe you can win this war." Grace took a step closer to the throne. The guards moved to stop her, but Zorvax waved them back. He was curious now, intrigued by this tiny creature who showed no fear. "Let me tell you about my species," Grace said. "Thousands of years ago, a small force of 300 human warriors stood against an army of over 100,000. They knew they would die. They fought anyway, and their sacrifice changed the course of history. We call that place Thermopylae." Zorvax said nothing. Grace continued. 500 years ago, a human city was surrounded by an enemy that outnumbered its defenders 10 to 1. The invaders expected the city to fall within weeks. Instead, the defenders fought for nearly a year, through winter and starvation, until the tide of war turned. We call that city Stalingrad. She took another step forward. Now she was close enough to see the reflection of the lights in Zorvax's golden eyes. "You have studied our technology. You have counted our ships and our soldiers. But you have not studied what we are. Humans do not measure victory the way other species do. We do not calculate acceptable losses and strategic withdrawals. When you threaten what we love, we fight. We fight until we win, or until there is no one left to fight." Zorvax leaned back on his throne. "Brave words, but words do not win wars." "No," Grace agreed. "They do not. But I want you to remember this conversation, High Prelate. I want you to remember that I came here alone, into the heart of your power, and I told you the truth. Humanity will not surrender. Humanity will not run. And if you attack our worlds, you will learn why no species in our history has ever succeeded in conquering us." She turned and walked toward the exit. At the door, she paused and looked back over her shoulder. "You see us as weak, because we are small and young. That is your mistake. We are not weak. We are simply patient. We are waiting to see if you are wise enough to choose peace. If you are not, then may your gods have mercy on you, because we will not." Grace Holloway walked out of the throne room and returned to her shuttle. The Vectari guards watched her go in silence. In his throne room, High Prelate Zorvax considered her words for a long moment. Then he dismissed them. The human was bluffing. She had to be. No species in their right mind would choose war against the Dominion. He gave the order to proceed with the attack. It was the worst decision of his life. The attack came at dawn. Commander Jake Lawson was in the command bunker when the first reports came in. 300 Vectari warships had entered the system, moving in perfect formation toward New Haven. Their weapons were already charging. "All civilians are in the underground shelters," Lieutenant Emma Vance reported. "The defense grid is online. Captain Cole reports the fleet is in position." Jake nodded and opened a channel to the Relentless, the carrier that served as the flagship of their tiny defense force. Captain Ryan Cole appeared on screen, a young man with hard eyes and a calm voice. 42 ships against 300, Ryan said. "Those are interesting odds, Commander. Can you hold them?" Ryan smiled, but there was no humor in it. "We can hurt them." "That is all I can promise. We can make them bleed." The battle began minutes later. The Vectari expected the human fleet to retreat or surrender. Instead, the 42 ships accelerated directly toward the enemy formation. It was a move that made no tactical sense, a suicidal charge against overwhelming firepower. That was the point. The Vectari had studied human military doctrine. They knew about formations and flanking maneuvers and strategic withdrawals. What they did not understand was that humans were capable of throwing all of that away when the situation demanded it. Captain Ryan Cole led the first wave. His pilots were not flying to survive. They were flying to kill. Fighter after fighter streaked toward the Vectari ships, some of them firing weapons and others simply ramming their craft into enemy shields at full speed. The Vectari shields were strong. They were designed to withstand sustained bombardment from capital ships, but they were not designed for this, for waves of small craft that treated their own lives as ammunition. Lieutenant Danny Price was 24 years old. He had joined the Terran Defense Force because he believed in protecting innocent people. When his fighter took critical damage, he had a choice. He could eject and hope for rescue, or he could aim his crippled ship at the nearest enemy target. Danny thought about his family back on Earth. He thought about the colonists hiding in bunkers beneath New Haven. He thought about what the Vectari would do to them if they won. He did not eject. His fighter struck the shield generator of a Vectari destroyer at 3,000 kilometers per second. The explosion tore through the ship, killing hundreds of enemy soldiers. Danny Price became the first of many human pilots to make that choice that day. The battle raged for 3 days. On the surface of New Haven, Jake Lawson coordinated the defense from his bunker. He watched the reports come in with a mixture of pride and grief. Every hour, more human ships were destroyed. Every hour, the Vectari fleet grew closer to the planet. But the enemy was paying a price they had not expected. 78 Vectari ships were destroyed in those 3 days. Their commanders had expected to lose none. The human pilots and Marines fought with a ferocity that the Vectari had never encountered before. They did not surrender when their ships were crippled. They did not retreat when they were outnumbered. They fought until they could not fight anymore, and then they found ways to keep fighting. On the 3rd day, Captain Ryan Cole's carrier was finally overwhelmed. Surrounded by enemy vessels, with his weapons exhausted and his hull failing, he ordered his crew to the escape pods. Then he aimed the Relentless at the largest Vecthari ship in range and pushed the engines to maximum. The collision killed over 2,000 Vecthari soldiers and destroyed one of their most advanced battle cruisers. When the last human warship fell, the Vecthari fleet finally descended on New Haven. High Prelate Zorvax himself came down to the surface to inspect his conquest. He walked through the ruins of the colony, past burning buildings and broken machinery. He expected to find humans cowering in defeat. Instead, he found empty streets and sealed bunker doors. "Where are they?" he demanded. His soldiers searched for hours. When they finally breached the main bunker, they found it abandoned. The humans had used a network of tunnels to escape into the wilderness, taking everything of value with them. Jake Lawson and the survivors of New Haven had vanished into the mountains. Zorvax stood in the empty bunker and felt something he had not experienced in centuries. Doubt. He had won the battle, but the victory felt hollow. The humans had cost him 78 ships and thousands of soldiers to take a single colony world. They had fought like cornered animals, with no regard for their own survival. And they were still out there, hiding in the wilderness, waiting. Across human space, the news of New Haven spread like wildfire. The colony had fallen, but the stories of the battle spread faster. Danny Price, who crashed his fighter into an enemy destroyer. Ryan Cole, who rammed his carrier into a battlecruiser. The thousands of soldiers and pilots who chose death over surrender. The Vecthari expected humanity to be demoralized by the loss. They expected peace offerings and pleas for mercy. Instead, recruitment centers on every human world were overwhelmed with volunteers. Factories that had been producing consumer goods shifted to weapons and ships. Scientists who had spent their careers studying peaceful technologies now worked around the clock to develop new ways to kill Vecthari. Admiral Tony Reyes addressed humanity in a broadcast that reached every colony. "New Haven has fallen," he said, his voice heavy with grief. "But New Haven has shown the universe what humans are made of. Our people did not run. They did not surrender. They fought, and they made the enemy pay for every inch of ground." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was hard as iron. "The Vecthari believe this war is over. They believe we will accept defeat and beg for terms. They are wrong. This war has just begun. We will build a fleet larger than anything they have ever seen. We will hunt them across the stars, and we will make them regret the day they decided to attack humanity." On 100 worlds, humans listened to those words, and in their hearts, something ancient and terrible awakened. It was the same fire that had driven their ancestors to survive impossible odds, to conquer every challenge that nature and fate had thrown at them. The Vecthari had won a battle. But they had lost something far more important. They had given humanity a reason to fight. 2 years passed, and the galaxy began to change. The Vecthari Dominion had expected humanity to crumble after the fall of New Haven. They expected desperate peace negotiations and offers of submission. What they got instead was something they had never experienced in 10,000 years of conquest. They got hunted. Commander Kate Sullivan crouched in the shadows of a Vecthari supply depot, watching the guards through her night vision scope. She was the leader of a special operations unit called the Night Wolves, 12 soldiers who specialized in impossible missions behind enemy lines. "3 guards on the perimeter," she whispered into her communicator. 2 more at the main entrance. "Standard patrol pattern," Sergeant Mike Barnes replied from his position on the other side of the compound. "Charges are set on the fuel storage tanks. We have maybe 10 minutes before their patrol comes back around." Kate smiled in the darkness. "Then we better move fast." The Vecthari never saw them coming. One moment, the depot was quiet and secure. The next, explosions ripped through the compound, destroying months of supplies and fuel. By the time reinforcements arrived, the night wolves were gone, vanished into the void like ghosts. It was the same story across Vecthari space. Supply convoys disappeared without a trace. Communication relays went silent. Outpost worlds reported strange ships appearing from nowhere, striking with devastating precision, and vanishing before they could be engaged. The Vecthari had a name for these phantom attackers. They called them the ghosts who burn. But the guerrilla war was only part of humanity's plan. In hidden shipyards scattered across the 17 human systems, a fleet was being built in secret. Mining operations in asteroid fields worked around the clock, extracting the raw materials needed for warships. Factory stations hidden in the atmospheres of gas giants produced weapons and armor and engines. Colonel Jake Lawson, promoted after the fall of New Haven, oversaw the construction of the Liberation Fleet from a command center buried deep inside a barren moon. Emma Vance was now his second in command, coordinating logistics and communications across 1,000 secret facilities. "The latest reports from intelligence," Emma said, handing Jake a datapad. "The Vecthari are pulling ships from their border patrols to hunt for our raiding parties. Their supply lines are stretched thin." Jake studied the numbers. 2 years ago, humanity had 42 warships. Now they had over 300, with more coming online every week. The Vecthari still outnumbered them, but the gap was closing. "What about New Haven?" he asked. Emma's expression softened. "The resistance is still holding out in the mountains. The Vecthari control the colony site, but they have not been able to pacify the surrounding territory. Our people are giving them hell." Jake thought about Ben Cooper, the farmer who had refused to run. He had received reports that Ben was leading one of the resistance cells, using his knowledge of the land to ambush Vecthari patrols and disappear before they could retaliate. The Vecthari had taken New Haven, but they had never truly conquered it. On the Vecthari homeworld, a very different mood prevailed. High Prelate Zorvax sat in his throne room, surrounded by advisors who brought nothing but bad news. "Another supply convoy destroyed," General Varric reported. 30 ships, all lost. We have no idea how the humans found them." "The border worlds are demanding reinforcements," another advisor added. "They say the human raids are making it impossible to maintain order. 3 more systems have reported unrest among the slave populations." Zorvax listened to the reports with growing fury. 2 years ago, he had dismissed Ambassador Holloway's warnings as empty bluster. Now those words haunted him. Humanity did not measure victory in ships or territory. They measured it in will. The humans showed no sign of giving up. Every time the Vecthari destroyed one of their raiding groups, 2 more appeared somewhere else. Every time they secured a supply route, the humans found a way to disrupt it. "This is impossible," Zorvax snarled. "They are a young species with limited resources." "How are they doing this?" General Varric hesitated before answering. "High Prelate, our intelligence suggests that the humans have been building a secret fleet. We do not know its size or location, but the evidence indicates that they are preparing for a major offensive." Zorvax felt a chill run down his spine. He had underestimated humanity once before at New Haven. He would not make that mistake again. "Gather the Grand Fleet," he commanded. "Every ship we can spare. We will find this hidden fleet and destroy it before they can strike." The order went out across Vecthari space. Over 1,000 warships began converging on the border with human territory. It was the largest military force the Dominion had assembled in centuries, a hammer designed to crush any resistance once and for all. But the humans had been watching. They had spies in Vecthari communication networks. They had sensors hidden in the void between stars. They knew the Grand Fleet was coming. In his command center, Jake Lawson studied the intelligence reports with a grim expression. The moment they had been preparing for had finally arrived. "Send word to all units," he ordered. Operation Reckoning begins in 72 hours. Everyone knows their positions. This is what we have been building toward for 2 years. Emma looked at him. Do you think we are ready? Jake thought about Danny Price and Ryan Cole and all the others who had died at New Haven. He thought about the colonists still fighting in the mountains, waiting for liberation. He thought about Ambassador Holloway's words to High Prelate Zorvax. Ready or not, this is our chance. The Vectari are committing everything they have to this offensive. If we break their fleet, we break their power. If we fail... He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Emma understood the stakes. Across human space, ships that had been hiding in shadows and asteroid fields began to move. The Night Wolves and other special operations teams received their final orders. 300 human warships, crewed by men and women who had trained for this moment, prepared to make their stand. The Vectari Grand Fleet was coming, and humanity was ready to meet it. The final battle was about to begin. The Arcturus system had been chosen carefully. It was a crossroads, a strategic point between human and Vectari space where multiple jump routes intersected. More importantly, it was surrounded by asteroid fields and debris clouds that the humans had spent 2 years preparing. Colonel Jake Lawson stood on the bridge of the battleship Defiance, watching the tactical display as the Vectari Grand Fleet emerged from hyperspace. Over 1,000 warships, the largest military force the Dominion had assembled in living memory. Enemy fleet in position, Emma Vance reported from her station. They are scanning the system. They have not detected our hidden positions yet. Jake nodded. The human fleet was scattered throughout the asteroid field, powered down and running silent. To Vectari sensors, they would look like nothing more than rocks and debris. The trap was set. High Prelate Zorvax commanded the Grand Fleet from his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. He surveyed the Arcturus system with contempt. Intelligence had suggested the humans would make their stand here, but he saw nothing but empty space and drifting rocks. Find them, he ordered. Send scouts into the asteroid field. The first Vectari scouts entered the field and died within seconds. Hidden weapons platforms, disguised as debris, opened fire from point-blank range. The scouts had no time to send warnings before they were destroyed. Admiral, we have lost contact with the scout group, a Vectari officer reported, confusion in his voice. Before Zorvax could respond, the asteroid field came alive. Minefields hidden in the shadows detonated in sequence, tearing through the outer edges of the Vectari formation. Weapons platforms that had been dormant for months activated simultaneously, pouring fire into the enemy fleet. And from behind every rock and in every shadow, human warships emerged. Jake Lawson gave the order. All units, attack! 300 human ships descended on the Vectari fleet, like wolves on a wounded animal. But this time, the humans were not fighting a desperate defensive action. This time, they had the advantage of surprise and position. Captain Ryan Cole's successor, a young woman named Sarah Palmer, led the first assault wave. Her fighter group targeted the Vectari shield generators, the same weak points that Danny Price had exploited 2 years ago at New Haven. For Danny, she said as she lined up her shot. For everyone we lost. Her missiles struck true, and a Vectari cruiser's shields flickered and died. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out. Human pilots who had trained for this moment executed their attacks with precision and fury. They had studied every Vectari ship, learned every weakness, practiced every maneuver. High Prelate Zorvax watched in disbelief as his grand fleet began to crumble. Ships that should have been invincible were being torn apart by an enemy that should have been too small and weak to matter. How? He demanded. How is this possible? The answer came when his flagship shuddered under a sudden impact. Alarms blared throughout the ship. Vectari soldiers scrambled to their battle stations. Hull breach on Deck 7, an officer reported. Human boarding parties have penetrated our defenses. Commander Kate Sullivan and her night wolves had spent weeks planning this infiltration. While the fleet battle raged outside, they had approached the Eternal Dominion using captured Vecthari shuttles and slipped aboard during the chaos. Now they were fighting their way toward the bridge. Kate moved through the corridors of the enemy flagship, her team cutting down any resistance they encountered. The Vecthari soldiers were larger and stronger than humans, but the Night Wolves had trained for exactly this kind of close-quarters combat. "Throne room is ahead," Mike Barnes reported. "Looks like heavy security." Kate checked her ammunition. They had come too far to stop now. "Then we go through them." On the bridge of the Defiance, Jake Lawson coordinated the fleet action while monitoring the Night Wolves' progress. The battle had been raging for 6 hours, and the outcome was finally becoming clear. The Vecthari Grand Fleet was broken. Over 500 of their ships had been destroyed or disabled. The rest were in full retreat, their formations shattered and their commanders in panic. "Colonel, we are receiving reports from the boarding team," Emma said. "They have reached the enemy flagship bridge." Jake allowed himself a moment of hope. "Put me through." Kate Sullivan's voice came through the communicator, breathless but triumphant. "Colonel, we have secured the bridge. High Prelate Zorvax is in custody." The Vecthari leader was dragged before a view screen, where he could see Jake Lawson and the aftermath of his Grand Fleet's destruction. His golden eyes were wide with shock. "How?" Zorvax demanded. "Your species is young. You have no experience in galactic warfare. How did you defeat us?" Jake looked at the alien who had ordered the attack on New Haven, who had killed thousands of human colonists, who had expected humanity to simply roll over and accept conquest. "You made the same mistake every enemy in human history has made," Jake said. "You saw our size and assumed it meant weakness. You saw our youth and assumed it meant inexperience. You measured our fleet and our territory and concluded we were not a threat." He leaned forward, his eyes hard. "You never bothered to understand what we are. Humanity did not evolve on a peaceful world. We clawed our way to dominance against predators and disease and the indifference of nature itself. We survived ice ages that killed 90% of our population. We survived wars that devastated our planet. We are still here because we never learned how to give up." Zorvax said nothing. There was nothing to say. "Your dominion has 10,000 years of conquest behind it," Jake continued. "But you have never faced anything like us, and now you never will again." The news of the Battle of Arcturus spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. The Galactic Concord received reports with disbelief. The Vecthari Dominion, undefeated for millennia, had been humbled by a species they had dismissed as vermin. Ambassador Grace Holloway addressed the Concord one final time. She was older now, her white hair thinner and her face more lined, but her voice was as strong as ever. "Humanity does not seek empire," she said. "We wish only to live in peace, to explore the stars and build our future among them. But let this battle serve as a warning to anyone who would threaten that future." She paused, letting her words echo through the great chamber. "Humanity remembers every wrong done to us. We adapt to every challenge we face, and we never forget those who harm our people. The Vecthari learned this lesson at the cost of their grand fleet. I pray that no other species will need to learn it the same way." The Concord listened in silence. And across 1,000 worlds, among species who had looked down upon humanity as primitive newcomers, a new understanding took root. The humans were not prey. They were predators who had chosen to live peacefully among other species. But if that peace was ever threatened, they would remind the galaxy why their ancestors had conquered their homeworld. Never provoke the humans, for they are the monsters that monsters fear. On New Haven, the occupation finally ended. Ben Cooper emerged from the mountains with the other survivors and watched as human ships descended from the sky. Jake Lawson was on the first shuttle down, returning to the world he had been forced to abandon 2 years ago. The two men stood among the ruins of the colony, looking at the work that remained to be done. "We will rebuild," Ben said. Jake nodded. "Yes, we always do." And above them, the stars shone down on a galaxy that had learned a valuable lesson about the small, young, fragile species called humanity. They were anything but fragile.